Rex Heuermann. I'm an architect. I'm an architectural consultant. I'm a troubleshooter. Born and raised on Long Island.
Hi my lovelies, thank you as ever for joining me today. Well, today's case is a big one. It's actually not fully solved because the individual responsible for these murders, and I am saying it in the context that suggests that he's guilty. Usually I'll allow myself to be on the fence until the jury makes a decision, but I think you'll find throughout this there's a really compelling reason why people believe this particular perpetrator, who is incarcerated currently, is likely the individual they believe that he is. Also, there's some frustrations in this case because these kind of crimes should not be something that can be got away with for decades. When serial killers are literally so prolific that bodies are turning up everywhere, it makes you really question the issues that investigations have. And I appreciate that decades ago we had different technologies, and of course the scientific breakthroughs and the new developments in technologies for crime and investigation are incredible. But still, 20, 30 years ago, we still had decent ways to investigate crimes. And I just feel sometimes that human beings have less worth in certain circumstances, and it distresses me. So whenever I talk about sex workers in particular in cases, I know for a fact they don't get the same attention. I have very, very good friends who are actually ex-police officers, ex-DCI. Some of them were at the top of their game. And they will openly admit that when it comes down to resources, sex workers do not fare as positively investigation-wise as individuals who don't work in that field. Because the belief is that somehow they're inviting problems. I'm just getting that out of the way before I go into this because, like I said, for me, a sex worker is a human being of equal worth to anybody else. And if we don't treat them with that kind of respect, we allow people to slip through the net, and people do slip through the net who are sex workers. It goes without saying. But before we crack on with today's true crime case, a few things. First of all, give me a like if you like my content. It's really important for me. If you haven't subscribed yet but you like my content, please do. It takes a second for you, it makes a massive difference to me. And if you do like my stuff, please get your notifications on because it means that you will never miss an episode. And sometimes I do extra episodes here. Also, thanks to every single one of you who's supporting me on YouTube membership and Patreon. The reason I do so much content is because you guys have made it possible. You'll always get deep dives, you'll always get thoroughly researched, and hopefully you'll get some psychological analysis because that's my background. With all of that said, let's talk about today's case. And I suppose, even though this dates back a long time regarding crimes, it really starts to unfold on the 1st of May 2010. And this is when Shannan Gilbert disappears. She disappears in the quiet gated community of Oak Beach, New York. And essentially, it's the search for her that triggers and eventually will hopefully bring to justice a serial killer who evaded justice for over 3 decades. The Long Island serial killer case is one that many of you will have heard of. If you haven't, it's been in the press a huge amount. Like I said, the perpetrator hasn't actually been tried yet. He's going not guilty, and there was a hell of a lot to unpack in this case. So let's talk about Shannan Gilbert. She was 23. She's an aspiring actress when she disappeared from Jersey City, New Jersey. And like a lot of young women who are struggling financially, she basically advertised her sex worker services on Craigslist. And at the time of her disappearance, she was working as an escort. And it's really provoking something in me at the moment, the fact that so many young women are turning to sex work. Because on one hand, we know that the pornification of our society is playing into the reasons why people are deciding to do that. But there is also a desperation. I live in the UK. I live in the north of England. We're certainly not like London, where there is a great deal more money. I'm not saying for everybody, there are lots of economic problems there. But without a shadow of a doubt, there is a level of desperation in the UK right now. People don't have any money. And you might have children and you might be desperate to just provide them with a really decent life. And I'm talking basic, to be able to feed them good food, to live in a safe place, an area. And it's almost impossible for the average person now. And the problem with that is you're looking to find a way to bring in extra income. So that takes a normal, typical girl and makes her think in an abnormal, atypical way. And so it makes sense that when people are struggling, they're looking at how can I make money quickly, probably without telling the tax man, and be able to provide a better life for myself and for other people. And most of them do it on a temporary basis, but the ramifications can be really, really challenging. And for some people, particularly in this case, they can be fatal. So on the early hours of the 1st of May 2010, she goes to meet a client. She goes to meet a guy called Joseph Brewer in Oak Beach. This is a really quiet, gated community. It's several miles from Gilgo Beach. But something happens that night because shortly before 5 a.m, the very same night, Shannan calls 911. And the reason that she calls 911 is she's basically fleeing from Brewer's house. And there's actually a 21-minute tape of this call. I'll link it in the description for those of you who want to listen to all of it. And she actually told the operator, someone's trying to hurt me. There's somebody after me, please. Somebody's after me, please. She then, in desperation, runs to an elderly neighbour's house. She knocks on the door, she asks for help, and then she falls down the stairs and runs away. So there is obviously a degree of panic in this young girl's mind and body. Now, one resident, Gustav Coletti, actually said to the police, a young woman who looked like she was partying all night came to my door around 5 a.m. on the 1st of May. She was screaming, help me, and she said that someone was chasing her. Now, he did, as any good person should. He called 911, as did actually another neighbour who was also hearing about this and was very worried. And she'd actually been afraid to let Shannan into her home, which I understand because there is a girl who's wide-eyed and seems to maybe be under the influence and they're just not wanting to invite trouble into the home. But nonetheless, she still acted and called 911. So that's two people in the same area calling 911. Now, the police eventually dispatch officers, but it's too late. At that point, Shannan's nowhere to be found at all. Now, 2 days later, Shannan's sister, Sherry Gilbert, she learns that her sister's gone missing. And the reason for that is that her boyfriend had called to say, listen, I don't know where Shannan is. She's not come home. Sherry said, I was immediately starting to panic. I could hear the fear in his voice. And the Gilbert family said immediately they filed a missing persons report. But bear in mind, it's the most frustrating thing in the world, filing these missing persons reports. And I do appreciate that people will have total empathy and sympathy with police and with those who take the calls, because of course there are a ton of people who get in contact with the authorities regularly. Some result in things really horrible happening to people that need to be investigated. Some result in it meaning nothing and actually the person, for example, who's gone missing returns straight away. But when you are a family and somebody that you love disappears and you get in contact with the police, there is often a process, and it's the same in America as it is in the UK, where if they're an adult, they have a right to go of their own volition. If they're in sex work, well, what do you expect? They're a sex worker. They're probably high, getting smashed somewhere and having sex with random strangers. That's the mindset. As opposed to thinking, there is an individual here who has disappeared and we need to think about their safety. There are all these nuances that play in, and often families don't get any help by the police till it's too late. I'm not trying to say that the individual police officer is responsible, clearly they're not. But in the UK right now, you're more likely to get help from the police for a non-hate crime because somebody annoyed you on Twitter. And they'll actually come round to your gaff and get into conversations with you about how you should operate your social media. And it goes on your record. It's not a criminal record, but if you get an enhanced check, which is a DBS check, it'll show up. And guess what? The person who's gone ahead and reported you doesn't even need to evidence what you've done. They just need to say you did it. So if police are doing that, you can imagine the frustration of a family anywhere in the world where those kind of things are happening, and yet human beings with all the meaning in the world disappear, and there is this protracted process to actually get it taken seriously. And the Gilbert family know something is wrong, and they actually, because there was no news from her, drove 140 miles from their home in upstate New York to Oak Beach to Long Island. They wanted to look for Shannan themselves. By this point, she's been missing 8 days. One can only imagine the horror they're going through. 8 days. There is no reason for her to have not returned. It's a highly unusual behaviour, and yet they aren't getting any help. So at this point, federal and state authorities in Oak Beach do begin searching the surrounding area, and they are hoping at this point they're going to find her alive. They speak to a dozen witnesses, homeowners in the area. They're just trying to piece together a timeline. Now, it's a month later that the Suffolk County Police Department's Missing Persons Bureau actually asked Officer John Mullally, who's 59, to aid the investigation because he's got a cadaver dog, which is a beautiful German shepherd called Blue. And obviously cadaver dogs can smell death, essentially notify you if there has been a death in that area or a body in that area. Now, Malaya and Blue basically unsuccessfully searched Oak Beach throughout the whole summer of 2010, but believe me, they were both trying, which I find really impressive. And the dog actually lives with that officer at his home in Brookhaven in Suffolk. And he did have a previous dog who was equally amazing. That dog was called Boomer. And that dog was stabbed 6 times by a man fleeing the scene of a domestic dispute in 2004. He survived, but he did retire in 2005. So I think that gives you the mark of the man who looks after these dogs, because obviously he's incredibly committed to his work and is incredibly committed to those beautiful animals. And he's incredibly committed to finding bodies if he has the chance to do so. It's really important to him. So we get to the 11th of December 2010, and Malaya and Blue change the area of their search of Gilgo Beach. So they decide that they're going to venture west. They feel like they've looked in all the other areas that they need to, and they're going to take it in a different direction. Now, Malaya said he really stuck close to the shoulder of the nearby Ocean Parkway. And that's just great detective work, isn't it? Because if you think about the mindset of most serial killers, they are incredibly objectifying about human beings. They're just things to be used and thrown away if they wish to. They're just an object for gratification and pleasure in the moment. And then they'll just discard them. So I think that doing that, sticking close to the shoulder of the nearby Ocean Parkway, is really powerful because it means that somebody would discard relatively easily, but also the vegetation there's really thick. And FBI data actually shows that most bodies are disposed around 30 foot from the road. And that, as I said, is because when you've killed somebody, 1, you want to get rid of them quickly because you don't want to get caught with them in your car, for example. But 2, you really don't care. You've had your pleasure, you've had your fun, and they're nothing to you anymore. So just getting them out and throwing them away, that's the way that you feel about these human beings. Now, that afternoon, it's about 3 p.m. just before, Blue picks up a scent on the parkway. And Malia said, tail starts wagging, he's making adjustments with his head, there was some burlap, and then I saw that most of the skeleton was there. So he doesn't know whose body is found, but he knows that there's a body there, and also it's wrapped in burlap. So this isn't somebody who's just wandered off and died. This is an accidental death because the body wouldn't be covered. Now, this discovery, the skeletal remains of a woman, in this really nearly disintegrated burlap sack, was the first of several key finds that the police find in the same area. There's going to be a lot of things found in this area. So 2 days later, Officer Malia and Blue, they go back to the area. They want to help the homicide detectives collect evidence. And guess what? Around 500 feet from that first body, police find a second body, again wrapped in burlap, which is a strange thing to be wrapped in. So you automatically know that this is potentially a signature. This is potentially somebody choosing almost ritualistically to use burlap. It's an unusual thing to choose. By 1:20 p.m. on the same day, shockingly, another 2 bodies were recovered. So in total, 4 bodies were found in December 2010. At this point, the newspapers quickly get onto it and they realise that there could be a serial killer on the loose, and they quickly brand the 4 deceased as the Gilgo 4. The perpetrator in this case is quick to be given a moniker too. So they were given the moniker the Long Island Serial Killer, the Manorville Butcher, and the Craig's List Ripper. So they've got it. The press have got the information, the police know they are dealing with a serial killer, and there is nothing more terrifying than knowing that a serial killer is on the loose, because we all know that, yes, they might have a period of pause where they don't kill, but for the most part, they are waiting for the next opportunity. They are living in fantasy, they are planning and cultivating what's going to happen next, and nobody is safe who meets that victim profile. Now let's talk about Maureen Brainard Barnes. She's one of the victims. She was 25 when she disappeared. She was 4'11" and 48 kilograms. So that is unbelievably petite. She was born in Norwich, Connecticut. She had a 7-year-old daughter. Now, Morin worked as a seasonal telemarketer, and she actually turned to sex work when she couldn't find another job. She needed to make payments on her mortgage. This is what I'm saying about so many people feel desperate and they've just got to bring money in and they're not thinking about themselves, thinking about their responsibilities like children. And sex work fulfills that opportunity even if they hate what they're doing. And most of them do. Now, like Shannan Gilbert, Morin used Craigslist to find sex work, and she'd actually stopped escorting for about 7 months before she disappeared. She was working at a Super 8 motel in Manhattan, but she ended up getting an eviction notice on a property, so she returned to sex work at that point because she needed to pay. And she was last seen on 9th of July 2007, and she basically told people that she was going to go and spend the day in New York City. She had called a friend in Connecticut, and she'd at that point said she'd had an out call that day, meaning that she was going to go and meet a client, and she said that she was going to go meet them outside the motel that she worked at. Now, shortly after her disappearance, Sarah Keynes, that's one of Maureen's friends, she got a phone call from an anonymous number, and this male voice told Sarah that he'd seen Morin alive at a whorehouse in Queens. Now, he refused to identify himself, and he also didn't reveal the location of the said whorehouse. But instantly we're drawn into this possible belief that this is the perpetrator. What we know about many serial killers is the callousness within their mindset. They love playing with people. They like the cat and mouse game of chasing the actual person they're going to harm. They also like taunting the people who've lost those individuals because it's power. It's all power. It's titillating to them. So if somebody's got access to your phone because you've been harmed by them, then of course they can taunt people who are close to you because you can tell by text messages and by voicemails who's close to that individual. So that's just a game for them. Now, her body was unfortunately found on the 13th of December 2010 on the north side of Ocean Parkway near Gilgo Beach. It's believed that she was the first of the Gilgo 4 victims to be murdered. They know that she was restrained by at least 3 leather belts, one of which was used to tie her feet together. And her sister actually described her as the most loving mother, sister and friend. And I have to say her sister, Melissa Kahn, desperately tried to solve the mystery of her sister's disappearance. She scoured her emails and phone records. She stayed in touch with the other families, with the other victims. She just embedded herself in that investigation, trying to get her sister justice. Then there's Melissa Bartholomew. She was 24 when she disappeared again. Very similar victim profile to the last, 4'10", 43 kilograms. She was from Erie County, New York, and Melissa had actually been living in the Bronx, New York. Again, she worked as a sex worker via Craigslist, and she used the alias Chloe. She went missing on the 12th of July 2009. She had met with a client. She actually deposited $900 into her bank account. She did attempt to call an ex, but didn't manage to get through. She then spoke to a few friends and said that she was going to go meet a client. She'd be back in the morning. On the 18th of July 2009, Melissa's mother, Lynn, reports her missing. Now, her phone records show activity in Manhattan and Freeport, as well as Lindenhurst on Long Island. Then in July and August 2009, Melissa's phone is used by a man to basically taunt her family. And he calls them saying he's killed their daughter. In fact, on a call to Melissa's sister, Amanda, on the 26th of August 2009, the caller asked, "Do you think you'll ever see her again?" "You won't. I killed her." And then hung up. In another call, which is just too terrible to even imagine, he described what he'd done sexually to Melissa in graphic detail to her then 15-year-old sister. So this killer is living through these games, through these taunts, through these killings, and also through the fantasies. He's creating it in his mind and he's living it out. This is the number one type of dangerous killer that walks amongst us. They are the worst of the worst. You don't get more dangerous than the kind of person who's doing this. It's the joy and the thrill that they get from knowing that they've destroyed not just a human being, but the sense of safety of the family, the vulnerability that you've increased within that family's experience, and also the horror that you're inflicting on a day-to-day basis when these individuals have no closure, the body hasn't been found, and at the same time they're just hoping beyond hope that you are just some sicko who is calling them with absolutely no idea of really what's happened to her. But of course, whoever was making those calls did know what happened to her. And the reason for that is Melissa's body is the first to be found on the 10th of December 2010. Investigators actually believed that she was the second of the women to be killed. Lynn Bartholomew, she actually told CNN in 2011, "I still don't sleep through the night thinking about all of it." She said she jotted down everything she learned about the case in a notebook, and she was keeping in contact regularly with other families of the other victims. Then we have Megan Waterman. She was 22 years old when she disappeared. She was born on the 18th of January 1988. She again was very small, 5'5", so she's not a big girl. She was from South Portland, Maine, and she again, of course, is a sex worker via Craigslist. Now, Megan, she was last seen by a family boarding a Concord Trailways bus from Maine to New York. Then at 1:30 a.m. on the 6th of June 2010, Megan is last seen leaving the Holiday Inn Express on Long Island to meet a client. And then by the 8th of June 2010, she's reported missing. No one's seen her. Family members said it was really unusual for her not to check in on her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, who'd actually been left in their care. So they're automatically aware that something has gone wrong. Now, Megan's family at one time used funding from a non-profit human rights organisation to actually hire a team of private investigators to help search for her. This is the dedication level of the families, and this is why there are so many myths about sex workers. So often people see sex workers as these lonely, independent individuals who've got a fractured experience in their world and very little support. And this is why I get annoyed about some of the myths regarding sex workers. So many people see sex workers as isolated, abandoned individuals with no support. And don't get me wrong, of course, when you look at sex workers and their history, there is a higher proportion of individuals who experience dysfunction in their lives, and certainly that contributes to their choices, without a doubt. The same as you can become dependent on drugs and you require your next hit, so you use sex as some kind of currency. We know that happens, but then there was this mass amount of individuals involved in sex work who have loving families, who are absolutely devoted to their children, who are just great human beings, and their families are absolutely devoted to them. And the girls that I'm talking about so far, that's absolutely true for every single one of them. So they didn't want to let go. They were dogs with bones. It was as simple as that. Let's talk about Amber Castello. She was 27. And isn't it just amazing that I am just listing names? Isn't it just barbaric and horrifying that these people are bodies that have turned up time and time again, women of meaning, and yet, again, discarded to the side of the road? Amber was born in Charlotte. She was raised in Wilmington, North Carolina, but she was living in West Babylon, New York. It's basically a small town about 10 miles from Gilgo Beach. That was when she disappeared. Now, she did struggle with a heroin addiction. It basically began when she was 16 years of age, and she needed to work as a sex worker to support that habit. She was actually living with several other heroin dependents at the time. Now, she was last seen leaving her home on the 2nd of September 2010. She was going to meet a client. That client had basically offered her £1,500 for her services. So come on, if you have got a drug dependency issue, $1,500 is going to be something you want to get. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of hits. It maybe means that you can take some days off whilst you are dealing with your dependency, as opposed to having to then go get more sex work to feed your habit. So of course she goes. Witnesses said that basically the client she met had been at her home previously, so she thought that the person was safe. Obviously, they'd had some kind of interaction before, but just imagine being a serial killer and having that game in your head and connecting with someone to make them feel safe, to figure out the vulnerabilities, to ask them questions about their life, and then to go away and to build a fantasy about what you're going to do to them. Because like I said, they had seen this man with her before, and they described him as a large white male, approximately 6'4" to 6'6" in height. Now, we all know a guy of 6'4" to 6'6" is gonna stand out, but also he has some really big oval style glasses. And another witness was slightly less, shall we say, complimentary about him, less about the height when they described him, more about the fact that he resembled an ogre. I have great respect for that individual. Do you know what? In this modern era, where everyone's afraid of using words that offend, it's really difficult to describe people. Height is okay, unless they're very small and male, because then you feel like you're offending small males. Or if they're very overweight, God forbid you use a word that offends people. And so people struggle to just say what they think. And I genuinely feel like there is something quite wonderful about an individual going, he basically looks like Shrek, but not nice like Shrek. Shrek, but not a hero. Not green either. Now, they said that he drove a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche, and that clue would prove very helpful a decade later. I don't know about you guys. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's very rare that a description is given of somebody who's so tall, clearly very unattractive, and drives a specific car. Chevrolet Avalanche. There's a lot of checking that you can do. And I guarantee you're not going to find a lot of people who meet that description. How does it take 10 years before they actually identify somebody who meets this description? It's so ironic, guys, because he really does meet this description. Now, Amber's family had believed that she was in rehab. They didn't even know that she'd gone missing. She did stop responding to texts and calls, but bear in mind, rehab can be very exhausting, very traumatic, and it can also bring up a lot of family stuff. So when people stop talking to you for a period of time, you just put it down as they're going through some stuff and they'll call me when they need me. Now, of course, with all these bodies turning up, they need to tell the media exactly what's playing out. So Richard Dormer, the Suffolk County Police Commissioner, he said at a news conference that it was not a coincidence that 4 bodies turned up in the same location, and basically said it appears as though somebody targeted these individuals and dumped them. I don't think anybody needed to have that spelled out, but I appreciate they felt the need to. It's very obvious to us lay people what's happening. It's a serial killer. Also, he noted the fact that it looked like a car pulled up on the side of the road and just dumped them in the bushes. We expect that. Like I said, serial killers do not have any respect for their victims. And the bodies, he said, would indicate that they were dumped here by the same person or persons. And of course, when you've got that signature of burlap, that's very much telling you the story of a serial killer. And then 4 more bodies are discovered between the 29th of March and the 4th of April. This was in 2011. Now, these remains, they were found in thick bushes on Jones Beach Island off the parkway near Oak Beach and Gilgo Beach. That's within 2 miles of the Gilgo 4. So at this point, the police realised they're going to have to expand the search area up to the Nassau County border. At this point, they find 2 more bodies. That's on the 11th of April 2011. They're found about 1 mile apart, approximately 5 miles west of the Gilgo 4. We're now up to 10 victims, guys. 10. Now, when they first find the bodies, there's a problem because identifying people, particularly when there's been a huge amount of decomposition, and not everybody gets reported missing as well, these are things that make the experience of identification very challenging. So, of course, they begin with Jane Doe's, which in the States is the name given to a non-identified individual when they die. So Jane Doe number 6 was Valerie Mack. Now, Valerie Mack, she's also known as Melissa Taylor. She was aged 24. She was 5'1" and 45 kilograms. So this guy is pinpointing individuals that can't fight back. Again, she was working as an escort when she went missing in the spring of 2000. Nobody actually reported Valerie missing. It devastates me that. It devastates me that most of us listening, myself included, have people who love us. We have people who are there for us. We've all been through bad times where things have been challenging, and I'm not saying that people just answer our prayers and swoop in, but we kind of know that we're safe. And you have somebody like Valerie Mack who just disappears and nothing happens. She just vanishes and there's no real concern. Nobody even reports her missing, and she had a young son. She was living with a boyfriend in Port Republic, New Jersey. So why didn't they report the fact that she'd gone? What does that say about the level of worth people had around Valerie? It's really upsetting to even consider that somebody who was human, who was born with so much potential, and ends up just dead with no one actually caring about the fact that she was no longer in their lives. Just so sad. We get to the 19th of November 2000. At this point, a torso is devastatingly discovered by hunters in the woods near Manorville, Long Island. It's 181 miles from Port Republic. And of course, at this point, they don't know who she is, so she gets the title Jane Doe. Then they actually do discover the same Jane Doe's head, hands and right foot that shows up in the brush near Ocean Parkway in April 2011. So this girl at that point is called Jane Doe number 6 because she was the 6th victim discovered. Now, what happens at this point is the FBI's DNA lab collaborates with Suffolk County homicide detectives, and very fortunately, they are able to link Jane Doe number 6 to her family in New Jersey on the 28th of May 2020. At this point, the Suffolk County Police Commissioner, Geraldine Hart, said that a genealogy profile had been put into a publicly available site, and that had led to Valerie Mack's aunt in New Jersey, and then that led them to Valerie's adoptive family, and then her son, who was then in his 20s. Now, this also revealed details of Valerie's life. Apparently, it was relatively tragic. She was left without parents at a really young age. She moved around a great deal. She was in the foster care system, and then eventually she was adopted. She also had 3 arrests for sex work. It's devastating, like I said, that they had to go through all of those processes to just figure out who Jane Doe number 6 was, because nobody cared. Nobody cared about Valerie Mack. I'm making a point, I suppose, of repeating her name and talking about her a little more at length because we have to care about her, right? We have to care about Valerie Mack. I hope her son realises that he wasn't abandoned now. I hope her son realises that she would have come home to him had she been able to. Then we have Jessica Taylor. She was 20. She lived in Manhattan. She'd worked again as a sex worker in New York and Washington, D.C. Now, it's no link to Melissa Taylor, by the way, another one of the victims. That's despite the same name. So on the 21st of July 2003, she goes missing in Manhattan, New York City. She's last seen walking around the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan. 26th of July 2003, her naked and dismembered torso, missing its head and hands, were discovered 45 miles east of Gilgo Beach. The torso was also found on top of a pile of wood at the end of an access road just north of the Long Island Expressway. Also, a tattoo on Jessica's body had been mutilated with a sharp object. Those remains were again identified by DNA analysis in the same year. Then we get to the 29th of March 2011. That's when a skull, 2 hands and a forearm that were actually a match for Jessica's DNA were found. Now, Jane Doe number 7, she was given the nickname Fire Island Jane Doe. And naturally, she was Karen Vergata. Karen was 34 at the time of her disappearance in 1996. She'd also been living in Manhattan. She'd been working as a sex worker. She was last seen around 14th of February 1996. Again, she was never reported missing. Never reported missing. She remained unidentified for 27 years. Again, she was identified finally using genetic genealogy in 2022. Nobody missed her. Nobody missed this woman, Karen Vergata. What happens in a society where whole human beings can just vanish into thin air and no one cares? So again, it speaks volumes about her background. Now, on the 20th of April 1996, Karen's severed legs were found in a bin bag on Fire Island. On the 11th of April 2011, that's 15 years later, her skull and several teeth were recovered at Bay Beach. So we're obviously getting a very clear picture that this person who is killing these women is also very adept at dismemberment. They stick to a particular rigour in the way that they deal with the bodies and the way that they dispose of the bodies. We're absolutely dealing with one very sick individual, but we're also dealing with one who is relatively sophisticated at this point to the degree where they've managed to get away with murder of all these women, all these incalculably important people for such a long time. We're talking decades here. Now, the beaches that I've been talking about, they're about 20 miles apart. So her body was found at separate places, and they were also linked to the remains found on Fire Island in '96 through DNA testing. So the investigators had this hypothesis that Karen's legs were carried to Fire Island by the water and her remains were actually left on Long Island. There were also 3 unidentified victims. They were found in March to April 2011. They actually remain unidentified. Then there's Jane Doe number 3, aka Peaches. Now on the 28th of June 1997, a hiker finds Peaches' remains stuffed inside a black plastic bag inside a green Rubbermaid container in Hempstead Lake State Park in the town of Lakeview, New York. Now, only her torso was actually found, but also there was a maroon towel and dark-coloured pillowcase that was adorned with flowers that was with her body. Now, investigators said that Peaches was an African-American between 20 to 30 years old. Also, they noted that she had a surgical scar, which indicated she'd had a C-section. The victim also had a tattoo on her left breast of a heart-shaped peach with a bite out of it and 2 drips falling from its core, and that's why she had the name Peaches. And then over a decade later, so this is the 11th of April 2011, the rest of her body was essentially found. And they hadn't identified her at this moment, but it was in December 2016 that Jane Doe 3 and Peaches were linked. Because initially, Peaches was given the name Peaches because of that tattoo, as opposed to just calling her Jane Doe 3. But when they get the rest of her remains and can match it, they realise it's the same person. And then, on the 4th of April 2011, the police discover Baby Doe. So the police discover a skeleton of a female toddler. The toddler's between 18 months and 24 months, just a baby. And that baby's body was found around 250 feet around from the partial remains of Valerie Mack. The body was wrapped in a blanket, and actually the body showed no actual visible signs of injury. When they did the DNA tests, those DNA tests determined that the child's mother was Peaches, and the body of that baby was found 10 miles west. When they looked at the remains, it showed that the toddler was wearing gold earrings and a gold necklace, and that was actually very similar to the jewellery Peaches' torso was found with. Now, I have done some research around what other experts in the field believe happened to this toddler, and I will tell you that a lot of criminologists and experts have said it's unlikely that the toddler had been abducted by a stranger, and that the evidence suggests that the girl's parent or caretaker placed her in the brush to basically conceal her death for unknown reasons. Franklin E. Zimring, a criminologist and law professor at the University of California, Berkeley, said, "It's not simply that it's a toddler's death, it is that it's a toddler's unreported death. Whether it's accidental, intentional, or something in between, when the death of somebody that young goes unreported to the authorities, the lack of reporting suggests that this is intimately linked to events involving the custodial parent. Sometimes it's abuse, sometimes it's neglect, sometimes it's an accident." And Cheryl Mayer, who's another psychologist, they suggested that wrapping the toddler in a blanket suggests an emotional connection between the child and the person disposing of the body. And they also went on to say that it was something a mother might do. I just want to say, I really struggle with people suggesting that Peaches, who is the victim of a horrendous murder, is a murderer herself, potentially. Somebody who was either so neglectful to the parent, her child died, and she dumped that body of the child in the brush, or that she intentionally killed the child. I just feel like Peaches is somebody who was mutilated and brutalized. Her daughter's found dead, and it could be, of course, that she had been involved in the demise of that child. Couldn't it also be that the particular killer of Peaches didn't necessarily have any inclination to harm a child in the way that they harm the women that they want to harm? Because even psychopathic serial killers have boundaries. Even psychopathic serial killers have a particular belief system about what's appropriate and inappropriate. Now, some are a carte blanche. If you're alive and breathing, you are prey. But many have a victim profile, and many have that victim profile because of the way that they feel towards the individuals. These women are sex workers. What does that tell you about the mindset of the killer? They obviously see sex workers as lesser than other women. They're going for a particular victim profile. If there's a child here, why would they want to do to the child, an innocent being, what they do to the women that they despise? This child has done nothing wrong. It could potentially be that this killer decided, I have to dispose of this child because I've killed the mother. I don't want people to know anything about what's happened. I don't want any links to me. I don't know what to do with this child. I don't want them to be left in the brush so that they die horribly, or I don't want to keep them at home until somebody discovers them. So I will just smother them, for example, and just do it quietly. I'm not saying that happened, but I'm saying surely it should be a consideration. And this idea that the child was wrapped in something that suggests an intimate connection. How many times do we hear about serial killers wrapping victims in bedsheets and cloths and all of the things that go with it? How many times do we hear that people are discovered in bedsheets? And also, I do know that if you go through child deaths and parents who murder children, you will often find that they have been wrapped in something from the bedroom. That is less to do with emotional connection in my belief system and more to do with opportunity. What else are you going to do? You want to wrap the child's body up because you want to draw less attention to them. You don't want them being carried out, obviously dead. So you get something from their bedroom. I don't believe it's that they're sitting there going, oh, you know what? I've just murdered my son or my daughter. But you know, I'm going to take the Thomas the Tank Engine fleece because they always really liked that when they were alive. That has nothing to do with tenderness in my mindset. It's nothing to do with what a mother might do. It's what a killer might do who's trying to conceal the body. And also trying to conceal the body when they're dumped somewhere, because you're going to notice a child lay by the side of the road. You're probably not going to notice a fleece in the same way, for example. Now, another victim was found who was 5'6" and between 17 and 23 years of age. Now, this body was actually male, but as a male, he was found wearing women's clothing. So he or she may have been a transgender woman. With that in mind, it could be that they were living their life as a female and they had had the absolute misfortune to meet this monster. They were also missing 2 incisors and 2 molars. They also were found to have a potential musculoskeletal disorder, and the autopsy showed that that person had been dead between 5 and 10 years. And in September 2011, the police actually released a male composite sketch of the victim. I don't want to offend anybody, of course. A male composite sketch of the victim is not going to be ideal if that individual was living as a transgender female and was presenting to the world on a social level as female, because obviously they may have had issues in their family. They could have ended up doing sex work as a way to look after themselves because they've been rejected. Bear in mind, this individual was Asian, and culturally there is a problem as far as a lot of individuals experience when families are not happy with their choices, particularly if they come from religious households. So the idea that they didn't put a female composite sketch out as well, that means that friends and people who were around that individual at the time who might have been able to identify them as a female wouldn't have been able to do so. Then we have Sandra Castello. She was 28. She's from Trinidad and Tobago. She disappeared when she was living in New York City in 1993. Now, when the police talked about this particular individual, they described her as a drifter. So her last address had been in Queens, but people didn't know whether she was actually living there at the time of her death. Again, one of the things that's different about this particular individual is they never said if she was a sex worker. What they said was that her lifestyle was substantially similar. Whatever that means. Was she a sex worker? Well, what we're saying is she's a drifter and her life was substantially similar. How do you know? Well, we're just saying that she enjoyed going to clubs and partying and maybe having sex. That doesn't actually make her a sex worker, does it? It just makes her a young woman going out and having fun. Substantially similar. That's what we're saying. She's a drifter. That's probably why we didn't find her body and we didn't do any investigations around it thoroughly. Just saying. You know, at the end of the day, is that actually appropriate to say? Unless they know. Now, Sandra's body was actually found on the 21st of November 1993, and she was discovered by hunters in a wooded area in North Sea, Southampton. That's 60 miles from Gilgo Beach. The police were able to identify Sandra by using her fingerprints. They'd been entered into a system after she'd been arrested for jumping over a subway turnstile in 1992. Hardly the crime of the century, but in some weird way, I'm glad that she did that. I'm glad that she has a name. I'm glad that people know who she is and how she died, because if she hadn't jumped over that subway turnstile, she might not have been identified. Now, there are possible other victims. So a professional drag queen in New York who is known by his stage name Sugar Bear. He was 6'5". His actual real name is Jamal Isaac. He was only 25 years at the time of his disappearance. That was in November 2002. And according to a really good friend of his, Andre had last been seen shortly before Thanksgiving, and he was getting into a car with a secret friend. And that vehicle was actually described as a red BMW driven by a Hispanic man. We get to the 17th of December 2002, and Andre's torso is found close to the boardwalk on Beach 63 Street in Avonay, Queens. Then on the 25th of January 2003, his head was found by ice skaters in East Mill Pond in Mauritius, which is in New York, and apparently he had a single bullet wound to the temple. Also, his arms and legs were found several miles away in plastic bags. Then on the 29th of May 2020, Andre's case was added to the Suffolk County Police Department's Gilgo news website. So they're starting to kind of put all of these victims together. And I guess part of that is to just keep it in the frame of reference for the local community and wider community. And also because people are like me, they look online at these things because they're deeply interested, curious, intrigued by what's happened to people. And when you are doing that innocently because you're just intrigued in this area, sometimes you remember things. If you come from that environment and that area, you can have your memory jogged and all of a sudden you can be a massive help to the case. So it's really powerful when the police put everything transparently front facing. As long as it doesn't, of course, cause issues with the trial, you don't have a problem in bringing into your world the public's perspective, because of course that helps. Now, on the 21st of April 2011, there was a pretty interesting article in the New York Times. So they publish a profile of who they believe the Gilgo Beach murderer would be like. They have done interviews with serial killer experts, with criminologists. This includes former FBI profiler Jim Clement. And they all said he's most likely a white male in his mid-20s to mid-40s. I just want to go, which then? Is it mid-20s? Is it mid-30s? Is it mid-40s? Because I don't think it's that helpful when we profile somebody and say there's a 20-year possibility. I think that's quite a lot of years difference. Like, I think about myself at 20, or let's say 25, and who I am now, and I'm nothing like who I was. I don't have a terrible perm, for example, and I don't think some kind of yellowy orange hair is a good look for me. What I'm saying is, who I was in my mid-20s versus who I am now is entirely different. So I think maybe homing in a little bit on decade, if nothing else, would be helpful, because a lot of people can give false leads if it's so expansive. They also said that he'd be married or he'd have a girlfriend. They did say he'd be well-educated and well-spoken, that he'd be financially secure, that he had a job. They also said that he'd own an expensive car or truck. I guess part of that is because of the belief that there'll be a level of arrogance and superiority and front-facing necessity where they want the world to think that they're successful, because it kind of goes with the territory of narcissists and psychopaths. They also said that he might have sought treatment at a hospital for poison ivy infection. And that's a good point, because poison ivy grows in the dunes of Gilgo Beach. So of course, if you're going and dumping bodies there, you have far more of an opportunity to get harmed by it. They also said that as part of his job or interests, he would have access to or a stockpile of burlap sacks. Again, it doesn't take a genius to work that out, does it? I'm not criticising them, by the way. I'm just saying that, you know, when it comes down to the fact that the bodies are found in burlap sacks, it's unusual. It definitely sounds like some kind of signature, and that would mean they'd have to have access to them. They also said that he would live on or near the Ocean Parkway on the south shore of Long Island. They said that it would be likely that he had a detailed knowledge of law enforcement techniques. Also, he might have ties to law enforcement, which would have helped him to avoid detection. Now, an assistant professor of sociology at Drew University, a guy called Scott Bond, he said, this is someone who can walk into a room and seem like your average Joe. He has to be persuasive enough and rational enough that he's able to convince these women to meet him on his terms. He has demonstrated social skills. He may even be charming. Now, bear in mind, many of the Gilgo Beach victims actually disappeared in the summertime. So Jim Clement, who was the FBI profiler, he actually retired in 2009. He said there may be a seasonal nature to his connection to the area or to his fantasy and ritual. It may be the time where his wife or children or parents are away for the summer. There are many possibilities, but I kind of get that. He's saying, this person is an opportunist as well. He needs to plan for when he can actually go ahead and commit the crimes, and he's going to have those opportunities when his family are not around. And the burlap sacks, of course, that is a clue, isn't it? Burlap's not common anymore. It's a lot easier to trace, for example, than plastic bags. And Clementi went on to say, to me, it takes away from his forensic sophistication and criminal sophistication and adds to the possibility that he's more interested in this ritual aspect. So again, that signature. Not required for the kill, a signature. It's all about really gratifying the psychological and emotional needs of the killer. Now, finally, at the beginning of December 2011, police finally found the first sign of Shannan. That was in the marsh next to Oak Beach, not far from when she was last seen. They found a pair of jeans, a pair of shoes and a pocketbook with Shannan's name inside. And it was 1 week later, on the 13th of December 2011, that Shannan's body was found. They'd actually done 19 months of investigation at that point, and her skeletal remains were found face down and nearly intact. It was about a quarter of a mile away from her belongings as well. So she wasn't, of course, dismembered like the ones I've talked about so far, but obviously that doesn't mean that she wasn't murdered. Now, the autopsy of her body was carried out in May 2012. At this point, Suffolk County medical examiners stated that Shannan's cause of death was inconclusive. They hypothesized at this point that in a drug-induced panic, Shannan entered the marsh of her own volition and accidentally drowned. The police believed and held the position that Shannan was not an 11th victim of the suspected Long Island serial killer. Now, Shannan's family were actually really upset by this. Her mother, Marie, she believes that she was murdered. On the 15th of November 2012, she actually filed a lawsuit against Dr. Peter Hackett. Now, Dr. Peter Hackett was a physician who claimed that he was one of the last people to see Shannan alive. Now, Marie claims that she got a call from Dr. Hackett the day after her daughter went missing and said that he was a doctor who was caring for her. So Shannan allegedly showed up at the Dr. Hackett's home in Oak Beach on the day she went missing. She stayed shortly and then she left. After she vanished, Hackett called Shannan Gilbert and said, I gave her drugs to calm her down. She was in a panicked state. Now, on one side, you can say, well, that's quite altruistic. Somebody turns up really panicked, you have access to drugs that might calm them down. But on the other hand, what are you doing handing out drugs when you have absolutely no idea of the patient's history? She isn't actually a patient of yours specifically, and you don't know what else she's taken. She's a hugely panicked state. It could be that she's under the influence. You don't know what contraindications there are doing that. Now, in the past, Dr. Hackett admitted to calling Marie once, but recalled a very different conversation on his part. He said, no, I don't remember having the conversation that Marie's saying. I just rang to offer my help as a board member of the Oak Beach Homeowners Association. At this point, the Suffolk police actually cleared Dr. Hackett as a suspect. Marie Gilbert said, I do believe in my heart that Dr. Hackett played a major role in my daughter's death. It's time we stand up for our rights. Nothing like a mother's fury, I will tell you that. Nothing like a mother's fury, guys. They actually went and had an independent autopsy because of those results. So in September 2014, a forensic pathologist, Michael Baden, unbelievably professional and experienced, he actually conducted an independent autopsy because he wanted to establish a clear cause of death. I know it can't always happen, but for the most part, if you really dig deep, you can figure it out. And for the families, it's so powerfully important to have that level of closure and understanding. Now, Baden was formerly a New York City medical examiner, and he has a great history. This guy is a detective of the body on every single level. And do you know what he found? He found damage to Shannan's hyoid bone. So one end of the broken hyoid bone was rough-edged and the middle had a hole through the centre, as if it had been drilled or even hole punched. That was the look of it. And the Gilbert family attorney, John Ray, said, we know from scientific evidence that virtually every woman who has been strangled or hung breaks her hyoid bone. And in this case, this was ignored by the medical examiner of Suffolk County. So Baden concluded that this evidence was consistent with the fact that Shannan was strangled to death. And they went on to say there is no evidence that Shannan died of a natural death, no evidence she died from a drug overdose or by drowning. And after these results found and handed over, Suffolk County Police responded by saying that they would review their autopsy. Well, damn right you would, because it seems like one big gaping hole has been left to fester, and a family knows that something dreadful happened to their child, and yet everybody was just suggesting that she ran into the area by herself of her own volition and just drowned, which is highly unusual even when you are a little bit smashed on drugs. And obviously she wasn't, which makes it even more compelling for the family to actually have it reinvestigated. Now we get to the 10th of December 2015. At this point, Suffolk County Police Commissioner, a guy called Tim Siney, announced that they would be taking a fresh look into the murders. Well, good, because there's a hell of a lot of bodies turning up, and it's about time we figured out who this absolute relentless murderer is. Also, at this point, they said the FBI would be joining the investigation, and this announcement came after longtime police chief James Burke actually resigned from the post in October 2015. He was indicted on civil rights and conspiracy charges. Apparently, he allegedly handcuffed and beat a man who broke into his department-issued SUV. Don't get me wrong, guys. I know it's not appropriate for a police officer, particularly one of his standing, to beat up a guy who breaks into your department-issued SUV. But I also think it is really upsetting when somebody feels they've got a right to smash up your property. And not everyone can contain themselves in that moment. But obviously, he had to resign from his post. But I also feel like it's important to say why, because a lot of people will understand how somebody can lose it in that circumstance. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying I understand it to some degree. Burke also, allegedly though, had blocked FBI involvement in the Gilgo beach murders and the disappearances that had happened in the past. So even though the FBI had been present, so they'd assisted, they'd never officially been a part of the investigation until December 2015. So I think we can say that Burke had a few issues with control and losing control. Don't break into his car. You'll get some serious ramifications. But it's awful that they've got access to the FBI. You know, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, absolutely imperfect. I get it. Every big system is. But you know, they're specialists. This is what they do. And you would want all the help that you could get when it comes down to finding out the individual responsible for these horrendous murders. It's an ego thing when you don't choose to engage their services. We get to November 2016, by the way, and Burke was sentenced to 46 months in prison. It's taken very seriously when you're an officer of the law and you breach your own standing by breaking the law in such a way. So he got a relatively harsh punishment for that. Now, on the 16th of January 2020, they made a public appeal. So Suffolk County Police Commissioner Geraldine Hart, they released pictures of a black leather belt, and that black leather belt had the embossed letters HM or WH on them. Now, the belt had been found early in the investigation, so Geraldine Hart basically was appealing to the public for help identifying the belt and said, "We do believe that the belt was handled by the suspect and did not belong to any of the victims." Bear in mind, the victims on the whole were very petite women. So if you've got a belt that's relatively large, it obviously isn't going to be one that belongs to these petite women. She also at that point announced the launch of the website www.gilgonews.com to basically accept anonymous tips and provide updates, which is great because obviously there are a lot of armchair detectives like me and we are intrigued in these cases and we want to help. Now, when she did this appeal, people were a bit interested. They were very interested in why the authorities had waited so long to reveal pictures of the belt. And when the commissioner was questioned on this, she said, "So, we are constantly evaluating the investigation. We're looking at the steps we've taken. We're looking at the technology that's available at the time." I would like to suggest this commissioner comes and gets a job in politics in the UK, because the thing about the UK politicians is they never answer a question. They just say something different in the hope that filling the gap will make them seem like they're doing their job. Because you can imagine being in a situation where the press is saying, "Excuse me, Commissioner, yeah? Can you just explain to us why you have had this belt for a long period of time, you haven't released it to the public, being in mind that the initials could implicate a particular individual, and obviously more people have been murdered, which could mean that you've been preventing the public from making a difference to this case? Could you just explain that? Well, I can explain that, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to explain that. So the way I'm explaining it is that that was a belt, and you can use a belt for a lot of things. And there's new technology where belts are concerned, and there's science. Trust the science, follow the science. And we are working hard on the science and the belt and the case and everything else. So I think you'll find I have fully answered your question there. And all you need to know is everything we're doing is for the right reasons in the right moment. Thank you. Sorry, no, I just wanted to know why you hadn't released the picture of the belt. Shh, shh. Honestly, it's bizarre, but that's the way they explained it. We then get to February 2022, so very recently, realistically, and authorities at this point announced that they're going to create the Gilgo Beach Homicide Investigation Task Force. So they basically bring together local, state and federal investigators, and that task force focuses on phone records. And this is a bit disturbing for me because we're in 2022 and for a long time, phone records have been used to track individuals and also to absolutely prove guilt where certain individuals are in crime. So why hasn't this happened before? I'm just going to throw that in now. I'm finding it quite frustrating. Now, bear in mind, the reason they want to look at these records is because many of the women who were killed, they've been contacted by different burner phones. So whoever is killing them is obviously sophisticated to some degree. So using mapping technologies, the police and experts learn that the calls came from two key locations, Manhattan and Massapequa Park. Now, this task force did this huge comprehensive review of every item of evidence and info into the investigation. So they really dig deep to try to figure out anything that's been missed. On the 14th of March 2022, this is 2 months into the investigation, so they are going great guns. At this point, they discover a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche that was registered to Rex Heuermann. Now, bear in mind, all the way back to Amber Castello's disappearance, a witness identified a first-generation Chevrolet Avalanche being driven by her killer. So, of course, now they have a potential suspect. So let's talk about Rex Heuermann. He was, first of all, 6'4". Remember that profile? Very, very similar to the height they imagined. He was 60 at the time of the investigation. He was an architect, so a professional, and he was a father of two and married, as was expected. He was also president of the architecture firm RH Consultants and Associates. It was a company he'd founded in 1994. His adult daughter also worked for the company. Now, according to the company's website, Heuermann's company worked with the likes of Catholic Charities, NYCDP Sewage Treatment, American Airlines, and other really major tenants at JFK International Airport, so really successful. In an interview that was posted on YouTube in 2022, Heuermann said he was born and raised in Long Island, but had been working in Manhattan since 1987, a very long time. So we are getting these connections as well with where these women disappeared and where they ended up. Now, the architecture firm is based in Midtown Manhattan. This is where some of the Gilgo Beach victims were also last seen alive. In his professional life, also, some colleagues didn't necessarily refer to him in a positive way. In fact, words like arrogant and creepy seem to be the most popular way of describing him. Now, he had been married twice, so he shared a 27-year-old daughter, Victoria, and a stepson, Christopher, who had special needs, with his second wife, Asa Ellerup. He lived on First Avenue in Massapequa Park, which is a mere 20-minute drive from Gilgo Beach. Herman's neighbours said he was a quiet family man who basically lived in the close-knit community without making too much of an impact with them. But another neighbour said something altogether different. He said he'd lived in an area for 13 years and that children would actively avoid the Heuermann household on Halloween. He said most people don't knock on his door during Halloween. The kids are told to stay away. He's not a very nice person. He also said to the investigators that his home was dilapidated and always really dark. Now, because they've discovered this Chevrolet Avalanche and it links to him, they start doing a really comprehensive investigation of who he is. That actually consisted of over 300 subpoenas, search warrants, etc. So the investigators at this point were also able to obtain cellular billing records, and they showed general location information for Heuermann's phone. When they did this review, they also got his American Express records, and guess what? That showed numerous instances where Heuermann was located in the same general locations as the burner phones used to contact Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew, and Amber Castello. So he's basically got the burner phone on him, but he also has his actual phone connected to a network on him as well. Not quite as clever as he believed he was. Now, significantly, police could find not one instance where Heuermann was in a separate location from these other cell phones when such a communication event occurred. And of course, if some of you are at home now thinking, well, no, Emma, it could be possible that he was in the same area as the other phones all the time, it's just got unlucky. Let me just draw you back to one of the descriptions of this man, where a less politically correct witness suggested he looked like an ogre. He just kind of looked like an ogre. If you were to, for example, think about his size, 6'4", I don't know, paint him green, then it makes sense that that description kind of brings us to the idea that he should be a massive suspect in this case. So, for example, on the 10th of July 2009, this is the last day that Melissa Bartholomew is actually seen alive, both the burner phone and Heuermann's phone were in the area of Massapequa and actually travelled together towards New York City. Another example is on the 23rd of July 2009, this is approximately 6:42 p.m, a male caller uses Melissa Bartholomew's phone to contact her family. Now, this was located in New York City at this time, specifically attached to a cell tower located at 275 West 39th Street. That's 872 feet from Heuermann's then office space. You want any more? Well, the 10th of August 2009, Heuermann departed for Iceland, and guess what? All phone activity from Melissa's phone stopped. But then, remarkably, on the 18th of August 2009, he returns from Iceland, and guess what? The phone activity resumed the next day. Now, they also investigate his email accounts. They locate a number of online accounts linked to Heuermann. He obviously used fictitious names. The American Express records show recurring Google Pay payments made by Heuermann to Tinder. Records that are obtained from Tinder showed a profile that was set up with the name Andy. Now, Andrew is Heuermann's middle name. This was then linked to a burner phone, number 347-885-1697, and used the email account springfieldman9@aol.com. Now, this account was created on the 15th of January 2011 with the fictitious name John Springfield. And records from Verizon show that Heuermann's phone was used on the 11th December 2022 for a period of over 3 hours to access the Springfield Man 9 AOL account. This guy is banged to rights as far as I'm concerned. For you in the States, dead to rights, as you say. Now, records obtained from T-Mobile, they show that a burner phone 347-304-2671 was also used on multiple dates to access this account. These additional burner phones had frequent cell activity in Midtown Manhattan and Massapequa Park. These were specifically the cell towers that provided coverage to Heuermann's home and workplace. Then investigators turn up another junk email. That's thork080672@gmail.com. Google records show that this was made under the name Thomas Hawk, which I hate because a hawk is so predatory. A search warrant was then revealed to show that the email account was associated with a burner phone 347-304-2671, and that it was used to just conduct thousands of pornographic searches. And the type of searches were horrific. So girl begging for rape porn, teen girl begging for rape porn, 10-year-old schoolgirl, tied up and raped, Asian twink, tied up porn, 10-year-old blonde-haired girl, black girl, 10 years old, age 12 child with blonde hair and blue eyes, nude slave girls. I could go on, I'm not going to, but it gives you an indication of the kind of depravity this man was involved in. Now, the Thorpe email account was also used to conduct 200 searches between March 2022 and June 2023. And those searches related to active and known serial killers and, of course, the investigation into the Gilgo Beach murders. Because what do serial killers do? They like to be forensically involved in the actual investigation. They can't help themselves. They see it as their story. They're directing the movie. They want to know everything. They can't stop themselves from getting invested in exactly what's playing out. And they don't think they're going to get caught because they think they're clever, but ultimately they rarely are clever enough. Now, these searches included: why could law enforcement not trace the calls made by the Long Island serial killer? Why hasn't the Long Island serial killer been caught? Long Island serial killer update. Long Island serial killer update 2022. Unsolved serial killer cases. 11 currently active serial killers. Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew, Morin, Brainard, Barnes, the Gilgo Beach killer criminal mind. So those searches were made by this person who we know as Rex Heuermann, and it is absolutely incriminating in nature. I know that we all search true crime, but come on, you add all of that together and it is terrifying to imagine what was going on in this man's minds and actions. Now, the Thorpe email account was also used to search for a number of podcasts and documentaries about the investigation. And that same account repeatedly viewed hundreds of images depicting the murdered victims and their families. Significantly, Heuermann also searched for and viewed articles about the very task force that was investigating him. Now, another thing that happened that incriminated this man is the female hair and the male hair that was found in this case. So during the course of the investigation, each of the 4 victims' bodies were examined by a forensic scientist. Maureen Brainard Barnes, she'd actually been left restrained by 3 leather belts, and they actually found a female human hair on the buckle of one belt. Megan Waterman had been bound by clear or white duct tape, so 2 female human hairs were recovered from her body, and both were recovered in the vicinity of Megan's head. Amber Castello, she'd been bound by 3 pieces of clear white duct tape, and a female human hair was recovered on a piece of tape inside of the burlap wrapping near Amber's head. Now, all of the hairs were collected, they were sent for further DNA analysis, and then in July 2022, investigators were able to determine that the hair belonged to none of the women. So obviously this piques their interest. Whose is this hair? 21st of July 2022, the police were able to recover 11 bottles from a bin receptacle that had been left out for collection in front of Heuermann's house. Now, the Suffolk County Crime Lab took swabs from the bottles, which were then sent for DNA profiling. We get to the 24th of February 2023, and guess what? The hairs that they had retrieved from the victims' bodies matched the DNA of Heuermann's wife. So they have a real link. And then there's the male hair. So during the examination of Megan Waterman's skeletal remains and the burlap materials, Suffolk County Crime Lab recovered a male hair from the burlap sack she was wrapped in. 31st of July 2020, this was sent for DNA analysis. And guess what? They were able to determine it belonged to a male in mitochondrial haplogroup V7a. So on the 26th of January 2023, a surveillance team observed and recovered a pizza box thrown by Herman into a bin located in front of 385 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. They then get this box, they manage to get pizza crust from it, and they send it for DNA analysis. And that swab, guess what, guys, matches the DNA from the male hair found on Megan's body. So now they feel they've got enough. And finally, they arrest him on the 13th of August. At this point, he's charged with the murders of Megan Waterman, Melissa Bartholomew, and Amber Lynn Castello. By the February 2024, he's charged with the murder of Maureen Brainard Barnes. Of course, Heuermann pled not guilty to the 4 murder charges because he genuinely, I believe, thinks he can get away with it. Now, Asa Ellerup, his wife, she filed for divorce less than a week after Heuermann's arrest. And that tells me that she knows that he's a wrong 'un. I could use a professional word, but I'm not going to. She just knows is a wrong 'un. There's something about him. She's always known, and now she's realised that those fears are true. They then do the house search, and they turn up in that house more than 200 firearms. Now, I get it. In America, you have a right to bear arms. It's very strong in your constitution, and if you want a gun, fair enough. However, just going to throw it out there, guys, 200 feels a little bit excessive, particularly when he was actually somebody who worked in an area completely unrelated to guns. I mean, with respect, who the hell do you think is coming for you? What have you done in your life to need 200 guns? And I do understand that some people collect them, but I genuinely don't think it was the case for this guy. I think he just did it because he liked the sense of power and he liked using them potentially. Now, they found loads of these guns stored in a basement vault. They also found a wooden desk that they literally tore up. They used an excavator to dig up the back garden. They scanned for buried objects with lots of specialised equipment. They then searched the house a second time. And in May 2024, they were there for 6 straight days, and they were just seen removing dozens of boxes of evidence every single day. And Robert Macedonio, that's the attorney for Ace Up, he told the press, it seems to be that the focus was on the basement. There doesn't seem to be much disturbance in the bathrooms and the bedrooms. Now we get to the 6th of June 2024, and Herman appeared before a judge to be arraigned in the deaths of Jessica Taylor and Sandra Castello. This actually came after turning up digital evidence from Heuermann's house, and they found a significant collection of really violent bondage and torture pornography dating all the way back to 1994. Those images actually included breast mutilation, vaginal torture, the sexualization of decapitated women, and bondage. So these are really notable findings because they coincide with how the remains of Jessica and Sandra were actually discovered. Also, they got a hard drive that they recovered from his basement, and that hosted a Microsoft Word document called HK2002-04 that appears to be a planning document. So on the 7th of March 2024, when they recovered this, the task force believed it was just a planning document used by Heuermann to methodically plan to kill with excruciating detail. Now, the document actually included typos throughout, but nonetheless, it was expansive. So he had one called Problems. It seemed to be a guide to avoid apprehension. He had bullet points, DNA, tyre marks, fingerprints, MO, plastic bag, cat litter. So plastic bags, obviously, to help dispose the bodies, and cat litter because it prevents the smell of decomposition to some degree. He wrote witness, trace source of supplies, footstroke, shoe prints, photos, misleaders, police stop, truck stuck, fingerprints in gloves, plastic bags matched to box, hair and fibre. He also had a section called supplies, which is basically items needed to carry out the murders, and it included booties, lye acid, police scanner, rope cord, saw cutting tools, hair nets, photo film, burn can, foam drain cleaner, body wash wipes, tarps, drop cloths, medical gloves, bags, tape, large elect clips, ratchet cargo strap. He also used lots of abbreviations. So DS, they believe, meant dump site, and they genuinely think that that related to Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack's bodies. And the task force were just really intrigued to see just how much this man had recorded. And it's very difficult to suggest that this was innocent. He also had a pre-prep guide, and this seemed to be in advance of what he wanted to do homicide-wise. So he had vehicle inspection, engage T1, recon DS, as in dump sites, locate DS2, dump site, weather report, recon video cameras, recon pick zone for vid cams. So obviously thinking about what was around him on a CCTV level. Also prep, so steps to take closer to the time. So setup stage, holding area, build table, crossbar, hard point. These are all important to this man. And he also had a post event. He said destroy file, change tires, burn gloves, dispose of pics, have story set. So again, some people can say, well, this doesn't directly relate. But I would say this is absolutely clearly a serial killer who wants to record and also inform himself of expected actions. Also, there was something called body prep. So this literally says wash body inside and all cavities, remove trace evidence, fingerprints, hair, remove trace DNA, remove ID marks, tattoos. Remember, by the way, that one of the tattoos on the women had actually been really, really attacked, and that was to prevent identification, I suppose, as far as he was concerned. Also, remove marks from torture, remove head and hands, package for transport. I mean, how is this guy going not guilty, and yet that is what he is doing? Also, there was something that was clearly telling him to dispose of what he'd used, so tools and devices, clothes and personal items, drop clothes, wipes and towels, props, toys, wood items, anything that touched T1, so that would be referring to one of the victims, what you wore, so what he was wearing at the time, destroy book and computer files, burn gloves, dispose of box of plastic bags to avoid trace. Clearly he didn't go through with this because we have all of this. And it goes on and on and on. He even wrote things like get sleep before hunt, being too tired creates problems, hit harder, too many, hit to take down. Consider a hit to the face or neck next time for takedown. So he's kind of reinforcing what he needs to do more. He's living this constantly, refining this constantly. And this guy was literally able to get away with murder for so many decades. So you can imagine that he probably wasn't thinking he needed to get rid of any of this stuff because he genuinely didn't think that people were coming for him. He also had some interesting books at the home, things like The Cases That Haunt Us, and basically that outlines facts, evidence, and victimology of serial murder cases. And again, a lot of us have those books, but when you put it all together, what on earth is going on in this man's mind? Now, I hope that after telling you all of that information, none of you are on the fence. I'm not on the fence. I believe that Heuermann is absolutely responsible for all of these killings. I know he's gone not guilty, but that means nothing to me. It just shows that he's very arrogant. Now, Herman was initially charged with murdering 6 women between 1993 and 2010, but then in 2024, he was finally also charged with the murder of Valerie Mack. His murder trial is expected to begin in Suffolk County Supreme Court shortly, and Heuermann's lawyer, Michael Brown, has said he wants to get a trial. He maintains from the beginning he's not the guy. He said that over and over. Yes, lots of people say it over and over. It doesn't mean anything. Sorry, I'm not guilty. Yeah, I'm really worried about the fact that, as your defence, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that you are. I'm not guilty. I know, but there were all these bodies that seem to fit in with the list that you were writing that they've turned up. And you know those burner phones and your phone always being together? I'm not guilty. I know, but you lived in the area and you worked in the area. And also, I don't want to be disrespectful to you, but people have said that you look like an ogre. And also the profile has got the right height and you do have a career that's professional. You were married with kids, and all of that together does make you seem really guilty. I'm not guilty. You're right, you're not guilty. Keep saying that, I'm not guilty. Of course you're not guilty. I mean, that's not how it works, is it? Now, unbelievably, one of our victims, Shannan Gilbert, her mother was murdered. So Mary Gilbert, in the final years of her life, just worked so hard to pressure the police to take her daughter's disappearance seriously. She fought absolutely tirelessly to ensure that Shannan and the other victims would never be forgotten. And John Ray, who was the Gilbert family attorney, said, Marie saw Shannan as an unintended hero because it was Shannan's disappearance that ironically caused all the others to have been found, and now to have at least one arrest. Who knows what other lives had been saved because of the exposure of all this. But tragically, Mary didn't live to see the arrest of Rex Heuermann, or even to see justice for her daughter's death at all, because on the 23rd of July 2016, when she was just 52, she was stabbed 227 times with a 15-inch kitchen knife by another daughter, Sarah. Then she was bludgeoned to death with a fire extinguisher, and Sarah sprayed fire extinguisher foam into her mouth. Now, I do want to add that Sarah Gilbert suffered both emotionally and mentally after Shannan's death, and Sherry Gilbert in 2016 actually wrote on Facebook, so as a lot of you know, my mother passed away yesterday. She was murdered by my sister Sarah, who was battling a mental illness for 2.5 years. My sister Stevie and I are incredibly devastated beyond words, as our mother was the backbone of the family. And Sarah's actually been sentenced to 25 years to life for that crime. But what a tragedy, guys. You know, because the mother in that case, Marie, fought so hard. And she's right. Her daughter was an unintended hero because her disappearance led to all of these women's names being known, all of these women's relatives being informed. And most importantly, as far as I'm concerned, on top of that, this man who would still be killing today and believing that he got away with it, he would be walking the streets freely. Absolutely freely. There has to be some kind of inquiry into the mistakes that have been made by investigators. There has to be a conversation about how women who are sex workers are often thrown to the wayside. We have to take it seriously when people of great meaning to others disappear no matter what they do. I hope I've covered this case in detail. I hope if you haven't known it, that you know it a little bit more now. I've done it at this point because there is so much to digest. I will probably do a follow-up when he is found guilty. He will be found guilty, I'm sure. And I don't usually say that. I'm always on the fence because reasonable doubt is everything. But is there reasonable doubt in this? If you think there is, please do get in contact with me. Let me know in the comments below. Maybe you think they've got the wrong guy. But I'd say with his wife deciding to divorce him a week after he was arrested, it's pretty incriminating as far as I'm concerned. Take care, guys. I'll see you again next time. And let's remember, every one of those sex workers was a person of meaning. And for those who didn't have people who cared for them, whose names aren't remembered, at least we remember them now. Be safe.